Alright guys, about to get started with another video. While I'm waiting for people, I'm getting my notes set up. The reason I'm saying this is for anybody that watches this video at a different time. Like if you watch it later on today or tomorrow while it's not live, while it's still on Facebook. The reason I'm not going to be talking here for a few minutes is just so I can get set up and give time people to actually start showing up. Hey guys, see a few people joined. We'll get started here in just a second. I'm just making sure I got everything set up properly and to give people time to join in. But if you didn't see the post, what we're going to be doing today, for the first few minutes, I'm going to be answering questions again like I usually do at the start of these that I got the other night and a few this morning. And then after that, we're going to be I was thinking about doing a little bit of a Q&A just to go ahead and let people get some of their questions out there while we wait for more people. I think I might skip that and just go right on to the actual program, which the topic of today's programs, hey Alex, the topic of today's program is going to be animal traits and adaptations. And we're going to be talking about traits more than adaptations. The only thing I want to bring up with the adaptations aspect is the confusion with kind of differentiating the two. So it can be a little bit tricky, so we're going to go over that today. But for the most part, we're going to be talking about traits. And then after that, I'm going to make sure that the actual game that goes with this program is in proper order. Because when I opened it up this morning, it was a little bit funky. And I'm not sure if that's just because my internet was being weird or if something might have got corrupted in the file. But I'm going to get all that uploaded to a Dropbox and put the link in a separate post so that way people can download the activity that goes with this. And we'll talk more about the activity once we get to the actual program. Give me just one moment. Also a few more minutes for more people to show up, and then we'll get started. There we go. I forgot my drink, and I've already been doing a lot of talking today, so my throat's a little bit dry. That's better. But we'll go ahead and answer a few of the questions I got. I don't see any people in here that ask these questions, but they might watch the video at another time, so I still want to answer them anyway. And for those of y'all that are here right now, if y'all have any questions for me for this little Q&A segment, just put them in the comments. I have it so that I can see it. I did have a lot of problems with that the first video where people were asking questions and I wasn't seeing them. But I figured out how to make sure that they pop up and stay there and don't disappear. So now I can see them. But so the first question that I got asked was, why do I always wear a hat for these little Facebook Live program sessions? Two reasons. One, I just really like wearing hats. And two, my hair is awful. And I really don't want to have to take the time to make my hair look presentable for a 40-minute to an hour Facebook Live. So that's why I pretty much always wear a hat during these sessions. I just like hats. Just wanted to answer that question. The second question was somebody at, because yesterday's video we talked about different kinds of clay and pottery, and somebody asked what all different kinds there are. There's a whole mess. There's a lot of different types of clay, like a whole mess of them. We could talk about them in an entire segment on its own. But most of the clay that you're going to see used locally is going to be your earthenware, stoneware, porcelain, or raku. Raku is what you're going to mostly see sculptures and stuff made out of because it's a really, really strong, it's a very, very strong clay. It's very easy to kind of position in a pose if you're making a sculpture. And then if you change your mind, it's really easy to reposition without messing up the clay. But raku is also super, super absorbent, so it's not at all good to use for cups. It also doesn't take glazes very well. You got to have a very specific glaze for raku. And that glaze, again, is super absorbent. So if you put like coffee or something in there, it would soak right through. Not like instantly, but it would soak through and, eventually pretty much ruin your pot. But stoneware, earthenware, and porcelain, those are the three main ones that you're going to see being used in commercial pottery. The most common one is brown earthenware. And the reason that's the most common, it's the easiest to make, easiest to find. And it's honestly, as far as clay goes, it's pretty inexpensive just because it's so readily available. Stoneware, a little bit more pricey, but it's also a little bit fancier. And another question that the same person asked about clays was, with all the different types of clay, how do glazes react? Which is an excellent question. That is an excellent question, because that's not something I actually went over during the program. Every clay is going to kind of do different things inside the kiln to the glaze. A good example would be these two right here. These two are two different clays, but they're made with the same glaze. So you can really see the differences in color. On the porcelain, the blue and the purple is a lot shinier. On this earthenware, it's a lot more dull. And that doesn't happen all the time. It really also just depends on the glaze. And that really comes down to just knowing what you're doing with pottery. And I'm not going to answer these next two questions. I'm going to bring them up when we actually get to the program, because these next two questions are actually related to what I was going to talk about tonight. So, all those questions answered today. The people that are here right now, do y'all have any questions while we wait for a few more people? I really need some like music or something in the background just to fill these awkward silences. While I wait for you guys to ask anything, if you have any questions. Something else I was going to talk about. I put out a post the other day saying that I kind of wanted a title for these because I really like doing it. And honestly, I'm probably going to end up making this a recurring thing. Even when all this blows over and everything's still open and we can go back to, public programming. I'm probably still going to make this a recurring thing. And I don't know if I'm going to keep doing it as Facebook Lives. I might. But I kind of want to make this like a recurring thing, possibly a YouTube channel, or I might do a Facebook Live and a YouTube channel. I'm not sure yet, but the other night I asked for a good title so I don't have to keep saying, hey, welcome to listen to me talk for 40 minutes. One of the titles that I'm really kind of liking right now is The Talking Table, just because it fits the theme. I'm sitting at my table talking, so I don't know. And it's just kind of like a cute, simple, to-the-point title. So I might go with The Talking Table. But this is definitely probably going to be a recurring thing. And I'm getting a phone call. Let me turn vibrate off real quick so that doesn't bother everybody. There we go. I'll answer that later. But definitely going to be a recurring thing. This is not going to be something that I'm going to stop because I love doing it. And so far, everybody that's watched the videos and given me feedback said that they also really, really like it. Yeah, the vlog, like a vlog kind of setup is definitely what I'm thinking about doing. But, alright, if neither of y'all have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and get started on today's program. And you know what? I'm probably going to take this hat off, and y'all will just have to deal with my messy hair tonight. But today's program was going to deal with animal traits and animal adaptations. And I'm mostly just going to focus on animal traits. And the reason I'm mostly going to focus on animal traits is because they're a lot easier to point out. They're a lot easier to find, point out. They're also a lot more traits than there are adaptations. But the reason I'm saying animal traits and adaptations is so... I forgot to turn my TV off, sorry. But is because the reason we're going to talk about both of them. Adaptations, a lot of times, can get confused and mixed up with traits. And traits, likewise, will get mixed up with adaptations. Because the differences between the two really just depends on how you look at it. Now, scientifically, there are some actual adaptations. Scientifically speaking, there are things that are specifically and strictly adaptations. But in the broad scheme of things, and when we're doing programming and stuff like that, they're interchangeable. So, we're going to go ahead and get started. And the first thing I kind of want to get y'all thinking about is what are some common traits and adaptations that we see in everyday wildlife. We're not going to talk too much about like exotic wildlife, but mostly just things that we have here. Because, and the reason I say that, exotic wildlife has a lot of different traits and adaptations that we don't have, and that's mostly due to environment, habitat, and their kind of evolution in that area. And with that said, one thing that I want to make really clear, because I got to be careful when I say the word evolution. With these videos, I'm not doing any kind of preaching, I'm not making any kind of statements, and I'm not doing any kind of agreements or disagreements. So, if I say a word like that might be kind of taken to the political spectrum, don't take it that way. When I say evolution, I'm talking about evolution from a scientific wildlife education standpoint. And what that means is the same thing as adaptation. If you leave, for example, if I go and move off to somewhere really cold, stay there for a while, I'm eventually going to adapt. I'm eventually going to, quote unquote, evolve to better fit in that area. So when we're talking about evolution, we're not talking about, anything political or religious. We're just talking about changes in that animal's biology and chemistry to better fit an area, environment, habitat, etc. So, keep that in mind when we're talking about adaptations and traits. So, start thinking about some very common adaptations and traits in our just everyday local wildlife. Because some of the most common ones that people usually think of are a few of the most common ones. And this might not be what you're thinking of, so if you don't think of these, don't feel bad. This is just from my experience, what I usually get told whenever I'm doing this program to an actual live audience. The most common answers I usually get are deer antlers, the sticky tongue from frogs, the long sticky tongue. Some other ones that I have gotten are beaver teeth, which we do have a beaver right here to talk about that. And another one that I've been getting, and this one's kind of interesting to me because I never really talk about this one just because it's on the microscopic level. But one answer that I've been given and it is a common trait, is the microscopic hairs on animals' legs that allow them to kind of crawl up walls. So like with our lizards and especially our insects, the microscopic hairs. That is a common trait. So those are just a few of them to get y'all kind of thinking about it. And if y'all think of any, put them in the comments. If y'all think of any questions while I'm talking, put them in the comments. So that way there's more interaction. It's not just me babbling off for 40 minutes. But just think of some. Feel free to bring them up and ask about them. But what we're going to be talking about today are how those adaptations and traits specifically help an animal to survive in their habitat and their environment. Why those animals have these specific adaptations. So a very good example of this is, and we're going to kind of get a little bit scientific, blind fish in caves. So that's going to be something that I'm going to have to look up myself. And the reason for that, I love fishing. I love fish. I love eating them. But on the scientific scale, I don't know much about fish. But what I can compare that to is other animals that live in caves. So when we're thinking about animals that live in caves, we're thinking about a very, very, very limited light source. And a lot of times in caves, no light source whatsoever. So with that being said, eyes, functional eyes like ours, do take a lot of energy. So if we were an animal that strictly lives in a cave, that energy could be used for something else. So because of that, whenever we're looking at our mainly cave dominant species, we see very limited eyesight. And that's also true for animals that we see that live strictly underground. A lot of them will have very limited eyesight or no eyesight at all. So that's a good example that might be the case for the blindfish as well. I'm going to add that to my notes and try to answer that at the end of the program or answer that at the start of tomorrow's video, because that's going to be something I'm going to have to fact check myself on. But again, animals that live in caves or habitats and environments that have very limited light source have no need for highly functional eyes like we have. They can use all that energy and all that space on their face for something else entirely that's a lot more helpful or beneficial to them. But that was a good question. That was a great question. But some very common ones, again, in our environment, most of the traits and adaptations that we're going to find, especially in our mammals, are very simple. So, for example, fish, we'll bring up fish again, gills. Gills are a very important trait for their habitat. And to get a little bit scientific, we're going to talk about some exotic wildlife and how their traits might differ from our own. Now, when I talk about this, keep in mind, our local wildlife do have these same, they also do what I'm about to talk about. But the environment that we're about to go to, they use it to a whole new level and a whole different extreme. So desert environments, for example, desert habitats, especially with your reptile wildlife, we see a very, very strong change in thermoregulation because they're in a very, very complicated environment. So one of the things that we see is, for example, just the designs on their back, those scales. And a lot of your desert wildlife, their skin and their scales are going to be highly reflective. And the reason for that, they don't want to dry out or overheat. But because they're in that environment, that desert environment, the loss of pigmentation in cave crickets. Okay. That's also going to be something I might have to look up later because that's insects. And insects and fish in the scientific and biology spectrum, not my strong suit. So I'll add that to my list as well. And I can also talk about pigmentation here in a minute. But in our desert environment, again, highly reflective skin, that is an adaptation. But depending on how you look at it, it can also be a trait. And that's why I said it's a very, very complicated thing to separate. So that's why I'm just going to be calling them traits and talking specifically about traits just for simplicity's sake. And so it's a lot more fun and not so much scientific explanation. But so highly reflective skin, a very common trait that we're going to see in a desert habitat. And that's just to keep them from overheating and drying out. Now we do see thermoregulation in our local wildlife and our local habitats and environments. But it's not necessarily going to be to the same extremes as in a desert habitat. So, some that we commonly see in our habitat is going to be mostly in our mammals. And that's why I got all these different mammal skulls out here, because that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on right now. But the activity that goes with this program covers a whole lot of bases. So, we're going to actually branch out. We won't talk about strictly mammals. I'll just use the skulls as an example. But so another trait that we're going to see could be in our bird population. And this is a great horned owl skull. It's not real. This is just made out of resin. And you can actually get these for your own programming purposes or interpretation purposes. I want to say fairly cheap. And the price actually isn't that cheap. It's expensive. But as far as skulls and programming materials go, it's pretty cheap. This one cost me only about, I bought it a few years ago, I think 90, but you can find all this yourself, so just keep that in mind if you ever want to do something like this on your own. But back to the program, a very common trait that we find in our birds of prey is these eye sockets, these immovable eyes. Now, as you can see with him, his eye socket right here kind of imprisons his entire eye. Whereas if we look at this skull, his eye sockets are completely open. And that leaves a lot of room for development, but it also leaves a lot of room for movement, which is not the case for some of our bird species, like our great horned owl here. It's imprisoned. So immovable eyes is a common trait that we see in our birds of prey. Now, that helps them for a lot of reasons. And the main way that it helps them, it allows their eye to grow into the very back of their skull. So when we said that this fox right here, this gray fox, has a lot of room for eye growth and adaptation, this is a little bit better. And the reason for that, his eyes are growing in the back of his skull. So he has a lot more room for rods and everything to grow with the entire length of the eye. And this gives them a lot better eyesight. A lot better eyesight. And a lot better magnification of their eyes. But what's a con of that? They're not going to be able to see what's going on around them. They have another trait that helps them with that, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. But eyes fixated straight in the front of the head like this, and all that room for growth straight back in the skull, helps them with hunting. So this is a very specific trait that is awesome for hunting, which is something we don't see in a lot of our prey animals, animals that are just for food, like deer, for example. You're going to see their eye sockets, or even a beaver. Beaver's not a great example. I'll have to get a deer skull in a minute. But with their deer, you're going to see their eyes are in the side of their head. The reason for this, the reason for the differences in the location of the eye sockets, which you can also see on our gray fox and our American black bear here, is, again, hunting. These are predatory animals. So their food is going to be moving around constantly. They're going to be chasing after their dinner. So because of that, it'd be a lot harder for them to chase down their dinner if their eyes were in the side of their head like a deer. And in fact, let me go get a good deer skull to use as an example. Here we go. So the difference is very, very clear right here. Eyes stuck in the side of the head compared to eyes in the front of the head. If our fox, for example, if his eyes were in the side of his head like this white-tailed deer, he would not be able to chase food efficiently. Because with his food running, if his eyes are in the side of his head like this, instead of seeing what's directly in front of him, he's going to be seeing what's going on to his side. Does not help when you're chasing down food. That's also a reason that you're going to see when deer are running around from food. They're kind of running like this. They're hopping around. That's because they can't really see what's going on directly in front of them as well as our fox. So eyes located in the front of their head. Very, very specific trait for predatory animals. Helps them survive in a lot of habitats as long as there's a food source. Now, I said that I was going to mention what other trait that our birds of prey or raptors have that helps them overcome that con of having their eyes locked in the very front of their head. And I don't know how well you're going to be able to see it on camera, but there's a bone right here. It's kind of obvious. Right there. That bone is called your occipital condyle. And the reason this is unique to our raptors and our birds of prey, and pretty much all birds in general, is with our mammals, like us, for example, Their occipital condyles are a lot bigger. These two bones right here. And as you can see, they're on the left and right of their skull. And they have two. Where our raptor, this is located right here, and he only has one. The reason that trait goes along with the eyes and helps them out so much is because those two bones lock a mammal's skull right here. It locks it into place on their spine. And it also limits your head movement a little bit so that you don't get stuck or tear something. With our birds, they don't have to worry about that. They have one, it's located in the very front. So it still locks their skull into place, but it gives them a lot more freedom of movement. So even though their eyes are locked in the front of their head, they can see what's going on over one of their shoulders. Now, a very common misconception and a very common question I usually get when I talk about this is how many degrees can they go a full 360? And the answer is no. Even though they do only have one, they do have only that one occipital condyle, and it doesn't limit their movement as much. It's eventually going to limit their movement. They're eventually going to move so far that bone isn't going to let them move anymore. Otherwise, what would end up happening, all that stuff going up their neck connecting to their brain would get twisted around, and that would not be a good time. Would not be a good time for the bird. So no, not 360, but 270 degrees. That's why this is another specific trait that helps them, not only because of their bodily, form, not because of the way they're made, but also because of their habitat. And the reason it helps them in their habitat, our owl species, and this is true for a lot of our raptors, have very specific camouflage. So the way their camouflage is so specific, if you're looking at a lot of birds, the front of their body is going to be a little bit lighter, and the back of their body is going to be a little bit darker. And this is true for a lot of our mammals. We see this in a lot of mammals, especially mice. Two-tone camouflage. And this is extremely useful globally for pretty much any animal. The reason they're going to be darker on the back, let's say that you're a mouse, and we'll get back to our owl here in a minute, but let's say you're a mouse and you're running along the ground. Your back is dark, just like the ground. So something looking down at you from the sky is going to see that darkness kind of blend in with everything else. Now, let's say again you're a mouse, and let's say you're up in a tree, and there's something on the ground looking for you to eat you. It's going to look up, and it's going to see a white belly, which blends in with the sky. Same thing goes to our owls, but to a bit more extent. They're not necessarily being hunted. They're doing the hunting. So usually what they're going to do is have their stomach, their front side, up against the tree, so that their darker backside blends in with that tree. Now, this is where that trait, that occipital condyle, and I'm not going to say unlimited, but less limited heft movement comes into play. Because if your stomach is up against the tree, you're not really going to be able to turn around as well to see if there's a mouse that you're about to eat. So that head movement helps them survive in that kind of forested habitat when they're hunting. So, just another very specific and very unique trait. I said we were going to talk about our beaver, so let's go to him real quick. This is a native beaver, and the trait that they're usually known for, pretty much specifically known for, is these teeth, what we call ever-growing incisors. And the reason we call them ever-growing incisors is because that name is very, very literal. Their incisors do not stop growing. And this is true for all of our rodents. Beaver is in the Rodentia family. It is a rodent. That's why something very, not really unique, but very common for like our mice and our rats is constantly gnawing on things. Same thing for our squirrels. So we think about a beaver, a lot bigger, constantly gnawing on trees, something woody. And the reason that they chew on trees, one, again, because they're bigger. Two, wood is really, really hard. It's really dense. So they're going to be able to do that chewing, do that gnawing, to whittle down and file down these ever-growing incisors to keep them at an appropriate length so that they continue to grow down. Otherwise, it grows straight back and will eventually come out the back of their skull and ultimately kill them. Obviously, they don't want that. And the other reason they do that is because another common thing for our beaver is to use that wood that they chew on to build a home. So it's kind of two reasons in one why they're always gnawing on wood. It's very useful for their teeth, but that's true for all rodents. So whenever the mouse is chewing on your wall, it's not doing it because it tastes good. It's doing it because if it doesn't, it's going to pierce the back of its skull and die because of its teeth. Another common trait that we see with the beaver, and I'll talk about this before I open up the program to questions and then start talking about the actual game that goes with this. But another common thing with our beaver is how they swim underwater a lot. And specifically the way that they swim with just their head out of the water. Their trait that goes along with that is their eye position. Again, like the other animals we talked about, eye position is a very important trait for the animal's habitat and environment. Their trait's going to be very specific to living in water. Now, they don't have gills, so we'll talk about that in just a second, and I'll explain how they actually live in water without gills. But their eye position, what you're going to notice, his skull is pretty uniform and flat. And his eyes are located in the side of his skull, but what's unique about it is they're on the top and the side of his skull. So his eyes would be positioned kind of like this. So that when he's floating underwater, when he's swimming and pokes his head up, he doesn't have to lift it very high to get both of his nose and his eyes above the water to be able to see where he's going. So that's a very unique and specific trait for their habitat. Another one is this bone right here. This is your occipital condyle. This is the bone that all the ear muscles actually connect to. This is where the actual ear is located. And the reason this is unique, notice the cambium. The cambium, I'll answer that in just a second. That's something I might actually have to refresh myself on, specifically for a beaver. Yeah, I'm going to add that to my notes as well, because I don't want to explain that wrong, and that's something I've not refreshed myself on in a good bit. So I added cambium to my notes. I'll check on that real quick here in a minute, just so I don't explain it wrong. But their ears, if you notice, come out the side, like our ears, but also go straight up, so that his ears will also be above the water when he's swimming. And that's something unique to our water-dwelling mammals, like our beaver, our nutria, things like that. Now, this isn't necessarily a trait. This is more of like the adaptations that we talked about. The reason that they can survive underwater without having gills, like I said, Jackson, I added that to my notes, and that's something I want to refresh myself on before I talk about it, because I'm not too sure. I haven't really researched that and refreshed myself on it in a good bit, because I've never really had to talk about it up until recently. But their adaptation that lets them survive underwater so well, and without gills, one, they can hold their breath pretty good long time. They're able to take in a lot of air above the water and then hold that air for a long time before they get to their den. And their den, for the most part, is underwater, but it's pretty dry. A lot of times when we think about beavers, we think about beaver dams. And beaver dams actually aren't the most common form of a beaver house. The most common form is what we would call a lodge or a hut. And the way that works is they're going to find kind of like an outcropping of earth that's near the water, but it has to be pretty tall. And what they're going to be doing is they're going to actually hollow out a cave inside or under the ground. They're going to dig a little tunnel, then hollow it out. So that's going to let water in, but because the way they dig their channel, it's going to level out eventually. And when they block the entrance with all those twigs and wood and sticks, that's also going to help filter out water a lot. And they also pack it with a bunch of mud, dirt, clay that they find underwater. So they're perfectly adapted to survive underwater, even as a mammal with no gills. Now, I want to, while I pull this up, I'm going to look up the part about the cambium real quick for you, Jackson, just to make sure I don't mis-explain this. While I'm doing that, if y'all have any questions, now's the time to ask them before I move on to like the last part of this program. Hey, Jeremiah. What's up, buddy? Jeremiah, I don't know how long you were here, but basically what we're talking about is a program over animal adaptations and traits. And I'm mainly focusing on traits because they're the easiest to talk about, and it doesn't take as much explaining to try to separate the two. Because adaptations, that could be an entire day by itself. So if you have any questions, Jeremiah, feel free to ask them. I'm looking something up for Jackson real quick. Okay, so I was more or less right. Uh, yeah, yeah. So Jackson, I was more or less right. I just really wanted to fact check myself. But cambium is the super soft part of the tree, and that's really good for their diet. It's the very soft tissues that's under the bark of the tree. And they have a very specific digestive system that lets them eat that. It's very specialized to digest tree bark. So that's a common misconception about beavers. One of the two is that they only eat leaves. But that cambium, that soft tissue, is a huge part of their diet because of the way their digestive system is made. And that, again, a unique trait to our beavers. All right. Do y'all have any more questions before I start knocking everything over? Before I start talking about the activity that goes with this program? And for some reason, it's not letting me put the worksheets that go with this in the Dropbox. So I might have to, worst case scenario, email it to everybody. I'm still trying to figure out an easier way to do that. But again, if y'all have any questions while I'm trying to get this to work properly, feel free to ask them. And it doesn't just have to be about what we talked about tonight. It can be any questions y'all have about what I'm doing or the past programs. There's been a lot of questions about pottery, so I mean, I don't mind answering more questions about that. For the most part, they will take some food into the dens with them, and when we mostly see that happening is when there's the presence of young or if they're trying to mate. But if it's a really good day, they're in a good habitat, and there's food all around with little to no predation threats, they're not necessarily going to hold food in there. Now, if it's winter, if they're getting ready to just, hunker down until summer comes again, so they know there's going to be a lot less food, even though they can survive on strictly cambium if they wanted to. They're not necessarily always going to store food if the weather, the habitat, and the environment is perfect. Now, if they are in an area, especially like out east or even out west, anywhere there's going to be a lot of predators like bears or anything else that might eat on a beaver, then yeah, they will store food in their hut just so they don't have to leave as much. And I do not know why it's not letting me add this to Dropbox. The reason I wanted to add the activity that goes with this program to Dropbox is because it does have a few pages, and if I put it to Dropbox, I can add the link to Facebook. Y'all can click it and just download it, print it out whenever you guys want. And I did not know it was going to be this complicated to upload something to Dropbox. Alright, there we go. I got it. There we go. So once that's finished uploading, I can link that to Facebook. Now, the activity that went with this program, and Jackson, you might actually remember this because I did email it to you at one point. The activity that goes with this is a little bit of a game. And basically what you're trying to do is, and the rules are included with this, so you don't have to keep coming back to this video if you forget the rules. The rules will be included in the sheet. But basically what you're trying to do, you have a sheet with different traits and adaptations on that sheet, such as gills, wings, talons, a snake-like body, 4 legs, 2 legs, diet restrictions, and you're going to roll a dice. Whatever number that dice lands on, that's what body part, trait, or adaptation you get. You add that to your animal at the end, you look at everything you have, and you got to think of what habitat, what environment that animal is going to be able to survive on based on those traits. And it can be pretty tricky. Sometimes you can get a perfect animal that can survive anywhere. Sometimes, though, you might get some pretty funky traits that it's going to be pretty challenging to figure out where you can go. But, guys, that is all I had for you guys tonight. I will get this posted on Facebook probably right after this. Yeah, I'll do it right after this. And y'all be thinking of any questions that you might have. And again, it can be about any topic we've already covered. And the topics that we've covered, by the way, was pottery, Native American pottery. We did the history of pottery in 2 different cultures, Native American culture, 3 different cultures. We talked about Native American, Egyptian, and China. And then we talked about Native American hunting and storytelling. And then today we talked about traits and adaptations. So if y'all have any questions about tonight or any of the other topics and programs, that would be the time to ask them while I'm here, or you can just send me a message like other people have been doing. And if you have any ideas for a topic that you would like to see tomorrow, because I will be doing another video sometime tomorrow, then feel free to choose some suggestions. And yeah, Chinese pottery is really, really stunning. Honestly, and we talked about this the other day, you can go back and watch that video if you want, but I'm going to repeat myself for a minute. Chinese pottery was almost strictly an art form. They cared more about the design and it being as beautiful as possible than being a super functional everyday use. The only time that we see one that's both incredibly beautiful and also used every single day would be tea sets, often used in the Chinese tea ceremonies. And also in Japan, but more specific, we're focusing on China. Because in China we see that a lot more. And it has a huge difference from functional, everyday use Native American pottery, which is, honestly, pretty much just this. Drab, not much shape to it, hardly any color, if there's any color at all. It's just there to serve a purpose. Until that purpose is done, it's thrown away. It's just a tool. For the Chinese, decoration, a super valued item. But yeah, Chinese pottery is awesome. But if y'all don't have any more questions about any of the topics or any topic you might want me to talk about tomorrow, then I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for tonight. And I will have another video probably... Tomorrow's video is probably going to be pretty early in the morning because I have a lot of errands and then some people coming over. I honestly don't. No, I do not. My main focus and my main research when we're talking about pottery, I mostly research and focus on pottery in ancient civilizations. That's my main fascination. If you want me to answer any questions about pottery during the British Industrial Revolution. I'll add that to my list of things to research for future topics. And I do not at all mind talking about that a little bit tomorrow. I can answer that question during tomorrow's lesson for you, Jackson. There we go. Added that to the list as well. Alright, anything else before we wrap up for the night, folks? And before I close out the Facebook Live, one thing you can help do for me, if you don't mind, is continue thinking of topic ideas. Because like I said at the beginning, I do love pottery. So that's definitely going to be something that I'll look up and possibly use for a future topic. But these videos, I'm starting to really fall in love with. I absolutely love doing this with you guys. It's really fun. So, again, this is probably going to become a recurring thing. And still trying to decide if I want to strictly do Facebook Live or upload the videos to YouTube just to have a place where they're all there. So I could go back and watch them myself, or y'all could go back and watch them yourself. Just have a place for them to kind of stay. But with that said, I'm still trying to think of titles for this. So it's not just called Corbin's Talking for 40 Minutes. The title I'm kind of playing around with right now is The Talking Table. Because it's me talking at my table. It's catchy, simple, and to the point. But while y'all are thinking of questions and topics to message me, also be thinking about some possible titles if you don't mind. And if nobody else has any questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I don't think I missed anybody's question. I'm just going to scroll through real quick just to make sure. And it looks like I got everybody. Alright, well then, that's it for tonight, guys. Y'all have a great night. Because it is so early, I might do another one tonight. Probably not, just because I have a few things to get done. But if I get done with my errands in time, I might do a shorter second video tonight just to go ahead and answer these questions. I'll post the link to the activity sheet that goes with tonight's program, so y'all can do that at home. And after y'all do it at home, definitely take pictures of whatever you come up with and either post it on my page or tag me in it. That way I can see it, because it's really, really fun seeing what people make. And if y'all have any questions or anything, just honestly feel free to message me. I'm not going to ignore it, and I'm definitely going to answer it. And y'all have a great night. Thank y'all for spending another 40 minutes with me.